name is Howard Buford, B-U-F-O-R-D. I was born in Whittier, California, August 17th, 1921. Whittier was a medium-sized town, had a Quaker history. I was raised in a family where during the Depression, which was a really tough time for a lot of people, but my dad drove a truck for Standard Oil. Wasn't a great job, but it was a steady job. We always lived in decent houses and decent furniture. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, a buddy of mine and I went, within 2 or 3 days, we went down to join the Air Force, or what at the time, I think it was called the Air Corps. It was part of the Army at the time, Army Air Corps. He got in and I didn't, because I have trouble with the colors red and green. I didn't know it at the time, but I did. I was a little late going in the service because the Air Corps, Army Air Corps, sent me to a doctor to check. They were trying to find out if they could do anything about color blindness, and so I went there for several months. I finally gave it up, and it was a little late, so all my buddies were gone. So when I enlisted and I went through the draft board, they sent me to a camp outside of Riverside in California, and I was somebody who was a goof-off in high school. I didn't study, I didn't do homework, and I got straight C's. As far as I knew or anybody knew, I was just an ordinary guy. But when I took the tests in the Army, all of a sudden they found out I had a very high IQ. So they put me in a college program. They sent me to Iowa State College. It was a big struggle for me because I might be intelligent, but I had not studied in high school, so it was a really tough. The Allied troops landed on Normandy, and when they did, they decided they didn't need engineering officers 2 more years down the road, so they pulled us out of the college program, sent us to the infantry. I was put in 101st, not the 101st, pardon. I was put in the 97th Infantry Division. The 97th was in Missouri, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. When I got there, I wanted to be in the airborne, so I kept applying. But they did not want to lose people from the infantry company that I was in, so they would let me go take the written exam. Then they would stall me on the physical until too much time had passed, and I had to take the written again. So it ended up, I finally got sent overseas as an infantry replacement. When we landed in England, they put us on trucks. They didn't land in France because the ports were all damaged by the war. So they dropped us in England, and they put us in a big camp area of replacements. So we got there in the afternoon, ate dinner, went to sleep, got up in the morning, and they asked us all to come out on the parade ground. When we did, there were officers from both the 101st and the 82nd Airborne asking for recruits. And of course, I finally got an opportunity, so I got in a line and signed up. Turned out that I had a couple of buddies there with me. They went to the 82nd, and I went to the 101st. I went to jump school in England. I was sent overseas to a camp in, I can't remember the name of the camp, but it was an old French military camp in France, in the middle of France. We were not ready for combat. We were trying to get all our gear set up, our training to be ready, but I was on guard duty that night, and about midnight the the sergeant of the guard came around and told me and all the other people on guard duty to go back and go to sleep. So we went back about midnight and went to sleep. About 4 o'clock, they woke us up. They told us we were leaving in a very short period of time to get ready to go. That meant we had to get the gear that we would use when we were in a combat, and put the rest of our stuff in what we had, big duffel bags, and it would be stored while we were gone. I thought it was about 6, but a friend of mine who's a guide in Holland told me that it was more like 8 o'clock when the trucks pulled up in front. But they were flatbed trucks with sides that you could pick one up, and several of them, and then it would be nothing. Well, they just took one of those off of the back. They didn't take roll call. They didn't know who was on what truck. We just piled on the trucks and took off. One of my buddies that was on a leave overnight came walking down the street and crawled on the truck. He didn't have a weapon, but he was in dress clothes. Another close friend of mine that I went to jump school with came running down. He was in the band or the orchestra, and they did not go into combat. So, and he did not have a weapon. He just came running down the street and piled on the truck with me. They didn't find out he was there until we got up to Bastogne and were actually in combat. The trucks drove. It's a long time ago, so I don't remember the details, but we drove all day and up to about midnight. So, and we stopped outside of the city of Bastogne. We were told to try to get some sleep. Well, it's snowing and raining alternately, and it's colder than you can. I don't know if it was 0, but it had to be at least close. Anyway, we did what we could until about started getting light in the morning, and they got us up, got in formation, and we walked through the city of Bastogne. I think my company was either the 2nd or 3rd company to go through town. And even though it was very, very early in the morning, the streets were just crammed with the citizens of Bastogne out there yelling at us and happy to see us. We marched for about, again, I'm not too sure I'm accurate, but it seemed like 2 or 3 miles, and we came to a small town, and I don't remember the name of the town. It was more a village, not a town. It was probably populated by farmers. I don't remember even any stores there. But we walked up into the town, and I'm feeling cocky as hell because I'm young and full of life, and I've never been in combat. And they told us to dig foxholes for a while, and we're going to be there for a while. So we dug foxholes, and we no more than got the holes dug, then 3 artillery rounds came in right around us. This was my first exposure, and after they'd gone off, when artillery goes off back then, I'm not sure what it's like now, but when the shell explodes, there's all these small pieces of metal, and they're flying through the air very fast, and they make a noise like whee. I had my head down in that foxhole, and when it was over, I stood up and told my buddy, "I've had enough combat experience. I'm ready to go home." But so we finally moved back to a flat area. The village was on kind of a hill, and we moved back to a flat area and put a line of foxholes in. We were there for, I imagine, 2 or 3 days. I don't remember real well. We were exposed to artillery once in a while, and we had big colored sheets, and we would put them out in front of our foxholes, and then it was a lot of the days there was no sunlight. A big part of the time there was no sunlight and heavy fog, real close. But once in a while it would rise, and when it did, the Air Force would come in and strafe the Germans. Well, we put these colored banners out in front of our holes so that the pilots would know where our line was and where the Germans were. And it was like an air show. We would sit there and watch these planes. At the time, it seemed like they were 100 feet over our head, but I assumed they were higher. And they'd be shooting. Their machine guns would be going. Their rockets would be flying. And we were just young guys, and so we sat there and enjoyed it. Eventually, they pulled us out, and we moved up and took over the town of this little village that was there. We put foxholes around it, so at night we would have outposts out there. And our main line was back maybe 400 or 500 feet, maybe 600 feet. This one night we were out there, my buddy, because I was on a machine gun, there was two of us in this outpost hole that we had, and we were on the end of a kind of a half circle, and there was a buddy who was, I could have almost thrown a rock at him, but he was just over the top of the hill that was by our hole, and so we're there, and all of a sudden the fighting starts up above. You could tell the difference between our machine guns and the German machine guns. An American machine gun went bup, 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 and a German machine gun went brrr. So we knew that there was both, it was a combat. In a little while, one of my buddies came over the hill from behind us, and he had a German he'd captured. He brought the German down, and the three of us got in the foxhole, and we had the German sitting up on the side. It was snow on the ground, and it was below freezing. It was cold. The German would have his hands up in the air, and then he'd start to let them down, and every time he did, this guy that had captured him, who was experienced in combat, I was not, he'd jam his rifle to his stomach and tell him get his hands up and put his hands back up. When he got, in a little while, there was a big firefight going up right over the top of the hill. Later, after the daylight, a buddy of mine who was up there, a German patrol had come in and they captured him. But meanwhile, we're in this foxhole, and with this German sit on his knees or squatting, and when it got daylight, the guy that had captured him took him back behind the lines. And also when it got light, there was a German hand grenade laying right there on the ground. What that guy had been trying to do when he wanted to get his hands down, he would have pulled a pin on that grenade and tossed it into the foxhole. We'd have all three been gone. Eventually, again, I hesitate to say for sure, but about 3 weeks after we were there, Patton broke through, General Patton, with his tanks. The tanks were, some areas the tanks could operate. Where I was, it was heavy forest. There were dirt roads every quarter of a mile maybe. There were just very narrow dirt roads. And tanks couldn't go through there. And they couldn't get through the trees. So what the tanks did was line up in a big row and then just fire into those trees. Now the trees were planted in rows. They were very old trees, but they'd been planted originally in rows. So the machine guns and the cannons, whatever the weapons the tanks had, were being fired right down into the trees. We were sitting there, we actually felt sorry for anybody who was down there, even though they were Germans. when that was over, then we started pushing them back. So what we would do, sometimes we'd stay out there all night. Sometimes we came back at night where we could get something to eat. But we would move out and move up until we found the Germans. There would be firefights. This one day, we moved up, and it was a place where there was a forest. It had a dirt road. We were moving up to the dirt road. The Germans were the other side of the dirt road. We could hear them talking. They could hear us. We were that close. But on the side at the forest end right there, the trees, and there was a massive clear area out there, a pasture, I suppose you'd call it. All of a sudden, here come two German armored vehicles, not tanks, but armored vehicles. They came up that road, and they were right there, 100, 200 feet, 300 feet, right there by us. And they're just, each got machine guns just spraying the area. We're all flat on our faces in the snow. And a buddy of mine told me afterwards what had happened. He had a bazooka. We always had a bazooka. A bazooka is a long tube, and it fires weapons to disable armored vehicles. He said he was flat on his face, scared to death. The lieutenant got up, picked up the bazooka, shot one of the armored vehicles, reloaded it, and shot the other one. That evening we moved back, several hundred feet behind the line. And the next morning we went up and dug foxholes and stayed there overnight. It got finally, we were not static or staying in the same place. We would go on a patrol, or a group of us a little larger than a patrol, and we'd go through the trees until we found the Germans, and then there would be firefights. And so on this one day, we were marching through the trees, and I had a machine gun, and they asked me to test it, and it wouldn't fire. And we tried changing the headspace and doing the things you do to a machine gun to make it function, and it wouldn't function. So we just left the machine gun, and they gave me a rifle. We're walking through these trees, and I'm walking down a row of trees, snow maybe 6, 8 inches deep. And I decided, I don't know why, I just decided I'll step over one row. I stepped over, and I'm looking at a German. He's as shocked as I am. We're standing there maybe 70, 80 feet apart, looking at each other. And of course, it's not like the movies. You don't stand up. We were both flat on the ground within a couple of seconds. And there's where I always felt like it was luck. This has happened to me over and over in combat. We're lying on the ground. A close buddy of mine is lying shoulder to shoulder, maybe at the most 6 inches between our shoulders. And we're firing, and the Germans are firing, but we're all flat on the ground. And he yells, "I'm hit." And a bullet hit him. He was on my left, and a bullet hit him just below his right knee, went down through his calf and out the side of his boot. The only way the bullet could have got there, because the German firing it was lying down, and the bullet was obviously going low, was it went right between our shoulders. That's not anything I did to protect myself, it's just luck. And that's part of what happened in combat. Some of us were lucky and some were not. Eventually, Patton broke through, and after he had broke through, we got more recruits and more replacements, and they pulled us out. Okay, now what would you like me to talk about?
Where did you go after that?
Well, we went to a couple of places. I don't even know exactly where, but there was, in both the places, there was a riverbed, and no vegetation out there, and there were forests on both sides. So the Germans were one side, we were the other, and you could hear them, and they could hear us. And in fact, when the snow melted, It was melting when we got there. There was a German patrol that had all been killed. They were lying right in front of us within 300 feet. And they, they'd all been killed. A young lady at the college one time when we were giving a presentation asked me were we worried about getting killed. And I told her, young men don't do that. I said, when we were fighting, we were scared. You have to be something out of your mind if shrapnel's flying through the air and you don't get an emotional reaction. But take us back 400 or 500 feet where we could build a fire. We talked about girls. That's what young men do. We would just play around. We had a mortar in our platoon, and so we were on one of these places. We were where there was a riverbed. You could hear the Germans a little bit, and especially when they brought them food. That's probably almost surely what they were doing. It was like maybe a horse and wagon, and they were pulling, and they'd go creak, creak, creak. You could hear it clear across, 400 or 500 feet. You could hear it. And so we got this border, and we would all guess at exactly what line it was and how far it was, and then we'd throw 2 or 3 mortars in there. And when they hit, you wouldn't hear the wagon for a while. Then a little while, it would start squeaking. I'm quite sure we never hit it, but we sure scared them. Then eventually we went back to France. When we got back to France, a friend of mine came to me and asked me if I would like to be in the Pathfinders. And I said, well, I'm not too sure what you are, but yeah. And what the Pathfinders were, when we invaded Normandy, and when the paratroopers jumped behind the German lines, and the idea was to disrupt them. And the places were picked so that they could disrupt trains, highways, bridges, be most effective. But something bad happened. The pilots of the C-47 planes that we jumped out of had never been in combat. These were just pilots. And so when they got over France and the anti-aircraft shells started coming in and they were heavy, I wasn't there yet, but I'm going by what my friends told me. These pilots just turned, when you were a jumper, there would be 3 lights on the side right by the door, and the door would be open. There would be no door. There was a red light. It told you, you'll just sit. Then it would get yellow. When it turned yellow, a sergeant would yell, stand up and hook up. You would stand up, you would check the back of your guy in front of you to make everything was okay. You checked your own front. You had a cable ran down the center of the plane. You would take it take the cord of it was actually more like a piece of heavy canvas, but this cord, you'd take it and put it so that it came around here this way, so that when you got to the door and as you turned to go out the door and jump, you let go of it, it just fell off. You didn't want to get it caught in your arm. So in practice, when you practice, you do the same thing. But if you jump in combat, you check all the gear on the back of the guy in front of you, and you check your own in front. So they moved us to a couple of places where similar. There was a riverbed, and there were Germans on the other side, but the contact was only artillery or mortars, and no physical individual contact.
So what did you do with the Pathfinders?
With the what?
Pathfinders.
The Pathfinders. Well, after we jumped in Normandy and the one good thing about the jump in Normandy was they had jumpsuits. They were different than the regular army fatigues, and they had a lapel here with a zipper on it, and if you opened it up, there were two things in there. A pocket knife, if you got trapped over a bush or in a tree or something, you could get this knife out and cut yourself loose from the chute. And the other was a little cricket. They're what kids used to play with. You hold it and you click it by pushing them. So what they did, the guys that jumped in Normandy had a knife and a cricket in this little thing. So that it was fortunate they did, because they got scattered all over, not where they were supposed to be. So it's dark at night, very dark. From what they told me, it was really black. A guy would land and he'd get out of his chute, then he'd look around, see if he heard a noise or anything. If he didn't, he'd click his cricket. And he'd move around until when he heard another cricket, then he knew it was one of his friends. It worked pretty good. The guys, I wasn't there, but the guys told me it worked pretty good.
Awesome, yeah. So what did you do after that?
Well, they developed the Pathfinders, so what the Pathfinders would do was jump in about 20 minutes or so before the rest of the division jumped, and they would land and they would set up about 3 or 4 different pieces of equipment so the planes could come, all the planes could come, and we were also had gliders, and they wanted them all in the same place. So it was a good deal for me, because I joined the Pathfinders when war was almost over, and when the war was coming, you know, we knew we were winning and the war was going to be over pretty quick. They took the Pathfinders and sent us to a town about 60 miles outside of Paris to be ready to jump. They thought the biggest threat was they were afraid the Germans would damage or hurt American prisoners of war, and we were going to jump around those prisoner of war camps and make sure the Americans were not damaged. But again, we're young guys, and we had one lieutenant, and I don't remember, I think there were about 12 of us. On Friday, we would go into the orderly room, and lieutenant would sign passes to go to the local town. It was about 2 miles from where we were. Then we would write our own passes. I don't remember now how we got them, but we'd write one for Paris, and then we'd go out and hitchhike our way into Paris, and we'd spend every weekend for about 6 or 7 weeks. We spent the weekends in Paris, and the funny thing was that the lieutenant was an alcoholic, obviously, and one time we're in Paris riding what they call the underground, and we run into the lieutenant. He's very drunk. The MPs had told him they were going to either arrest him or he got out of Paris right away, and he was on his way out. Now he knew he gave us passes to the local town, and here we are in Paris. We never heard a word about that. Ascoy.
So how long did you stay there?
Well, we were in a tent city when we came back, when the war was ending, and that's when I was asked to be in the Pathfinders. For a few weeks, we just sat there and camped, and we'd get up in the morning and do an hour's calisthenics, and then we'd run for an hour, and then the day was, there wasn't anything to do, and then all of a sudden they told us to pack up. So we got ready, and we got on a train. They moved us up into Germany. I can't remember if it was Germany first. Anyway, they moved us up, and we were in a German town in the Alps, small. It wasn't really a town, more a village. But there were Germans up in the mountains who had not surrendered when the war was over. And so we would take a patrol and start in the morning, and we would climb. Honest to God, it was like that. And I'm carrying this machine gun and some extra boxes of ammunition, and never found a German. Then they moved us to I think the name of that town was Bad Gastein. It was in Austria. The mountains were so steep, you would look at the roads they had and wonder how cars ever made it up, but they did. But the cars were all impounded and put into a big lot. And they had guards at the gate. And there were 2 German guards and 2 American guards. And when I was on that duty, I'd stand with my buddy on this side, and 20 feet away, the 2 Germans are standing there. They didn't speak English, we didn't speak German, so we just nodded at each other. We had a first sergeant who was an alcoholic. And I was on guard duty one time at this gate. And on guard duty, it would be 2 hours on and 4 hours off. Well, the 2 hours went, and then 2 more, and 2 more, and 2 more. I think it was something like between 8 and 10 hours we were still there. Well, I finally got irritable, I guess, and I took my jacket off, and I don't know why I happened to have a deck of cards, but I sat down with my buddy and started playing cards. And here comes the lieutenant who was in charge. And the first sergeant had gotten drunk, and that was why we had been left there so long. But now the lieutenant is looking at me and my buddy, and we're not standing there with rifles like we're supposed to. So this is a glider company, and I'm a jumper. So we were young. We didn't care for the officers. They might have been really decent guys, but we didn't like them because we were jumpers and they were glider men. And so they called my buddy and I in, and the captain obviously didn't know what to do with us. They didn't have a place to lock us up. I mean, we're in this Australian village, or not Austrian village. So finally, he told us that we had to go clean 3 kitchen stoves, field stoves. When you were in combat, the cooks were behind you, and they had these portable stoves, but they were big, maybe 4 feet square and pretty high, and they hadn't been cleaned in forever, and so we were going to clean 1 a day. So my buddy and I went out and we're cleaning this stove, and we take a break and we walk out. This town had been a hospital town for injured Germans, and there were lots of them there. So we stopped 2 of the Germans and asked them, would they like something? They didn't have access to the food we did. So we asked them if they would like to clean a stove for us if we furnished them a really good meal. So the last 2 stoves, they cleaned. And then we would go into the kitchen and get a couple of big meals for them. And unfortunately, somebody told the captain. So we were in trouble again. When we left that town, I tell you, the hills were really steep, and when you had a road, it was a narrow dirt road, and it was winding, and it was on a very, very steep hillside. So a buddy of mine was on one of the trucks that was hauling the big barracks bags, and he saw that 2 of the bags there were the captain and the commanding officer and his assistant. So he took their bags and just threw it down the mountainside. So when we got to the bottom of the mountains, they put us on railroad cars and hauled us back into France. He told me on the train, in boxcars, not train, we were riding in boxcars and sleeping on the floor. He told me that what he had done. So when we got to, I think it was called Mormelon, but when we got to this French town, they just dumped all our bags when they got them in a big pile out in the middle, and you just had to go through there till you found yours. So I ran out real quick and I found mine, brought it up to where my bunk was, or my bed, cot, and I went through and got all my personal stuff out of it real quick. And then I took the rest and I ran out the gate and ran downtown and I sold everything. Then I went back and I went in the orderly room and these two officers standing there saying, we can't find our bags. And I said, I've got the same problem. So they gave me all new stuff. Never a question. Now, I think by now you should have understood that I was not really fond of the Army. I was good in combat. But when you were back behind the lines, I didn't care for it. Got another question?
Sure. What was the one kind of event that kind of really stood out that you'll never forget?
Oh, events, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, when you're in combat, you get. There are peoples. I know that we had some in my company that did exceptionally brave things, but most of us were good soldiers. I don't think you were in the airborne unless you were going to be pretty good in combat. But the enlisted men are always fighting the routines and the things that are going on. So there was a period when I was in France in an old military camp where a buddy of mine, when I would get up and we would go eat breakfast, and then we'd leave and go downtown to the Red Cross and we'd get tennis rackets and balls, and then we'd go on across town to where there were some tennis courts, and we'd spend a few hours just banging balls around. The company never missed us because we were not there, and they assumed everybody was busy. We were coming back one day, we dropped off the tennis rackets at the Red Cross, and we're walking and we run into some of our buddies, and they tell us that what they had done was take the whole regiment and marched them out to some big field somewhere and had them sit there, and then they sent people, I assume some of the non-coms, back, and they had gone through everybody's gear, and if you had a pistol, you were going to the guardhouse before you were even court-martialed. I had a little tiny pistol. It would go in a watch pocket. It was so small. So I had a big duffel bag, but I had a small bag hanging on the wall. And the pistol was so small that in the middle of it were two pieces of canvas so you could slide an envelope or something down there. But it was small enough that I could put this little gun, it would slide down in there. Well, what had happened was that whoever went through my stuff dumped my duffel bag out on my cot and went through it, and instead of taking that other small bag down and dumping it out, they had just reached in the two big pockets and they missed the handgun. Well, the handgun was sold about 30 minutes later to a Frenchman. Should get the idea by now that I didn't follow the rules all the time.
Kind of sounds like it.
Hell, I was a good combat soldier.
Yeah.
But I was not a good peacetime soldier, or at least not ideal.
So what would you say the best times were?
Well, probably my best times when I was going to college, and that was for about, I can't remember, somewhere between 3 and 6 months I went to Iowa State College. Iowa did not have any military bases, at least around where I was. So we would, on the weekend, we would go into, not in Des Moines, I guess it was. Well, when you were walking down the street in Des Moines, these people stopped you all the time to tell you how much they appreciated you. And people would ask you to come to their house for dinner. And this one couple had us coming for, I don't know, 3 months. Every weekend we were eating dinner at their house. But one of the things that happened while we were there, he showed me a big knife. And he told me he had a friend who had made it out of an old bayonet. So when we went back to the infantry, I wrote him a letter and asked him if the guy would make me a knife. And he did. I paid him for it, but it had a big blade. I hesitate to say how big, but it was bigger than a normal hunting knife. And so when we were at Bastogne, I would tape it or tie it on the side of my boot. I never stabbed anybody with it, but it was sure great for opening cans of food and chopping firewood if you were trying to chop a small tree. And this one day we were out, we had a patrol, and there was a lieutenant, and I'm probably going against about 8 of us, probably about a 9-man patrol. And we were walking across an area that was level, and then there was a road, a dirt road. It was kind of a road with another one cut, so it was like a T, an intersection. There were 2 dead horses lying there. Just past the roads, there was a big stone wall, and something had blown a hole maybe 3 feet across in it. So the idea was we were going to run one at a time, dive through that hole, and get on the other side of the wall. When we all got over there, and then we were going to go down behind the wall, and there was a small village, and we were going to go through the village house by house. So the lieutenant and I were the last 2 there. And all of a sudden we're hit by a mortar barrage. And he and I are both up against one of the horses, trying to protect ourselves. Fortunately, the shrapnel was flying through the air. I can't make the noise it makes, but you're well aware that it's there. And neither one of us got hit, and I went through the hole and he went. My problem was, with a machine gun, at least the machine guns we had then, you put a belt of ammunition, you lift it up the top, you put a belt of ammunition in, you drop that, then you pull the bolt back, and it was called half load. Now, if you got ready to use it, then you pull the bolt once more, and now it's on full load. You hit the trigger, and it'll fire. So I've got it on half load. I climbed through I shoved my machine gun, but he didn't go all the way through, so I climbed through. I'm frantic to get through there because it's mortars coming in. And then I grabbed the machine gun and pulled it, but I didn't realize when I pulled it that the bolt had hit the wall. Now the machine gun's on full load. You hit the trigger and it'll fire. So we moved down the wall into the beginning of the village, and then we start going through, house by house. I hesitate to call them houses. They're very small living structures. And my memory's not that good. But we were going house to house, and we were several of us, and I got to the front. It was my turn to run to the next house. I run out and I run. I didn't know the machine gun was on full load, and my finger hit the trigger, and it went off right in my ear. Hell, I thought I was shot, and I stopped right out in the middle of it. And then I realized what had happened, and I ran. Kind of a silly, stupid, but humorous.
All right, sir. So what did you do, when did they tell you to go home?
Well, it was kind of a, I look back on it and you think about the values and the feelings you have when you're young. Um, we were getting ready to go to Japan. Uh, we were getting our gear all in first class gear, getting everything ready so and then we were going to board ships and we were going to go through the canal or however they went to get to Japan and to get ready to invade. And we would have been jumping in Japan. And none of us were too excited about that. But then they dropped the first atom bomb. And we get it in a little military paper. And then they dropped the second one and Japanese surrendered. And to us at the time, gee, that was a really big deal. We were happy because now we're going home. We're not going to Japan to fight. I think all of us were willing to go. We weren't saying we didn't want to fight anymore. It was just that we were happy to not be fighting anymore. We had lost, I would say when we left Bastogne, at least half, maybe 2/3 of my platoon had been hit or were injured. Well, I have to be careful with that. It was below zero for several days, and we didn't have winter gear on, and we did not, if you were on the front lines, you couldn't build a fire. So we were very happy to be back where it was warm. But we were also happy we were not going to Japan.
So they bring it back on ships?
Yeah, you know, I was extremely fortunate in that. They had a lot of small ships, and they hauled troops in. And when I went overseas on the Normandy. That was just there. We crawl on, and we're on this great big ship. It hardly rocked. It would a little bit, but not real well. And when I came home on the Queen Mary. And not only that, what they had done was take the staterooms and take the beds out and put bunks in there, so they would get one room might have 8 or 10 GI soldiers sleeping in there. But we also had a bathtub. You could take a hot bath, and it was our shower, and there was all kinds of water. Most of the guys were sleeping out in great big rooms or open spaces, and they had canvas bunks. They were sleeping in bunks, and then in the daytime they had to take it down. Well, we're sitting in there. We could take a nap in the middle of the day. We could take a bath or a shower. And a lot of the guys came to us, and we let them come in our. And, but there is comedy in the military. I got duty during the mess hours, and I had to work in the shop with a little cubicle where they made both tea and coffee, because it was an English ship, and they had English staff, and so these guys were all English. They didn't give a damn about coffee, but they liked tea. So we made coffee and tea in these great big, these things you see as trash cans. And we were on one level, all the enlisted men, the officers were on a level above us. Well, when the tea was getting low, what they do, these cooks would put coffee bags, hang coffee bags in there. So then they pour hot water in. Then when the guy, anybody was drinking tea, they were getting this crap that was half tea and half coffee. Well, one day the officers' mess ran out of tea, and they sent somebody down to get tea, and they got a great big container of tea. And one of the officers, when he tasted it, he just blew his top, and he came steaming down and chewed out the English cooks for what they were doing. Of course, we all thought it was funny. The cooks didn't. I haven't told you much about fighting, much.
Well, why not?
Well, I think there was more things that were humorous than.
Oh, okay, well, that's all right too.
I did not like the military. I actually disliked it intensely. I just wasn't able to adjust to things that, in Fort Leonard Wood, we're in the middle of the U.S., no Germans, no Japanese, big double fences around, guards all around the center, and we're still out there walking guard, and the rifle has to be at right shoulder arms. It was difficult for me to accept that. All right, we're ready for another one. I haven't told you much about fighting, have I?
No, but that's all right. Your story, you can tell it the way you want. You got a good story for us about fighting?
Well, yeah, there is humor even on the front lines. Somehow, some of my buddies captured a German, and they had him, and there was a couple of officers, there was maybe 4 or 5 Americans standing there trying to get information from the German. I wasn't part of that interrogation, so I don't know exactly what they were asking or what he was saying. But I was told he couldn't speak English. And he got scared or something. He just turned off and ran back towards the German lines, which wasn't that far away, probably, well, I don't know, not, but it was close. You could hear them talking. And somebody shot at him with, the Army, most of us had a rifle that was a regular 30 caliber rifle, but a lot of the people that had other weapons like mortars or officers had what was called a carbine, and it was a little smaller bullet. It didn't have the impact of a, and so one of the officers shot him and hit him in the butt. He just grabbed his butt with both hands and just kept right on running. And we lost him. Hi-ho?
Okay, what else? Must be some more stories there.
Well, that's about most of what was in the combat. If you want just stories, we got, after the war was over and we couldn't be on occupation duty all the time, we would be in France in military bases, and they didn't know what to do with us. So they improvised by having extra guard duty and things that. But this one buddy of mine and I, we just found ways to not be there. Then they would nothing. But they did give us passes, and some of the passes were pretty good. One of the guys got 2 or 3 of them actually got a pass to Switzerland, and they came back with several wristwatches. They were cheap. But I did get a pass to, I can't remember, there's 2 places on the Mediterranean, Cannes, C-A-N-N-E-S, and damn it, I can't think of the other one. But one was for officers and one was for enlisted men. So I got a pass there. And when I crawled on the truck, here was one of my close buddies from another company on there. So we were going to be able to run around together while... Now, a big pastime of the soldiers was the beaches were not sand, they were rocks, but they were all round rocks, not sharp. And these young ladies would come down in their civilian clothes, and they would go down on the beach, and they'd put a towel around them, and they would somehow get their clothes off in a bathing suit on. And all these GIs are just hanging on the rail, watching. So But they had a PX there, and what you had was a big sheet of paper, and each week was separated on there. And when you went through your line, you had to show it to somebody there, and they rubbed. I forget what. Anyway, they took a pencil or a pen. I think it was a pencil, and they scrubbed off, that you'd gotten your stuff. Well, this buddy of mine, I figured out, if we took a wax candle and rubbed it on there, then went through, these were French girls, they didn't care, they were just doing a job. They marked there with a pencil, but they didn't mark hard. Then we would scrape the wax off, put another layer of wax on, and go through. When you got everything that you got as your order, you walked out the front door, walked around the corner that was right there, and there was about 20 Frenchmen standing there, all wanting to buy what you had. So we would sell 3 or 4 before they couldn't hide it anymore on the paper. So then we looked around and we found where the officers that were stationed there had a hotel in a separate place. I don't know how we found it, but they had a PX in the basement. And this buddy of mine was about 6'2" and a really good-looking guy. And so we go down there, and he's flirting with these girls, and they're letting us have all kinds of stuff without any, we were just getting it. So we started selling it. And we would get it and go back to, I don't know why we went to a different area, but we did. And there were some black soldiers there. I think they were Algerian. I'm not positive of that. But they would buy everything we had. Well, the girls finally told us they couldn't sell us anything anymore. So they did have chewing tobacco. So we bought the chewing tobacco. It came in a package, and well, we went back to the area, and here were these Muslim soldiers again, and we sold them the chewing tobacco and told them it would be good for cigarettes. You could roll it in cigarettes, which it wasn't. So we went back and got some more and came back, and man, we heard them swearing and yelling, and they were running after us. And they found out we'd sold them something they couldn't use. So that was the end of our selling tobacco. We did.
Yeah.
We were living in a hotel. We were on the second floor, and we found out that the French would buy those blankets. So we'd go back, and he'd stand on the sidewalk, and I'd go upstairs, and nobody's in there in the middle of the day. The GIs are all out somewhere. And I'd throw him down blankets, and we'd sell them. We came home from whichever town that was with more money than we went with, and we'd had a good time while we were there. I'm sure you've gotten the idea by now that I was not going to be a career military man.
All right, so with that, all that entrepreneurial talent you had, what did you do when you got out of the service?
Well, when the war was over and they finally had us just sitting in this base, I was walking down the hall one day, and there was a slip top with schools you could go to. And one of them was a 6-week school in England, and I'm in France. It means it's going to take me several days to get over there. So I'm going to have about 2 months where I can be away from where all this marching you every day just to keep you busy. So I signed up for it. Well, it turned out to be a surveying school. Now, it wasn't a very good school. The teachers, especially the one guy, really didn't know that much about it. But I realized that here was something that was engineering, but it was outside. I wouldn't be in an office or a factory or anything anymore. So when I got out, I started looking for a job where I would be a surveyor. I started at the bottom. I signed up with at Los Angeles City, and they called me for a job, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I was not in a hurry to go to work, so I turned it down. Eventually, I got a call from the state of California, Division of Highways, and I got a job there. I started at the very bottom, I had a rough time for the first year, so till I moved up. But here I was learning to be a surveyor. I was good at it. I liked it, and I was good at it. About 10, 11 months after I went to work, Eisenhower signed a big highway bill. And if the state would put up 10% of the money, the federal government would put up 90%. The state of California had a massive amount of money in this for highways that they weren't using. So they just jumped right into it, and we were just building freeways like mad. But when you build a highway, a good example is, well, I'll use LA. We were moving down through residential areas in LA. What you did was you went in and you ran the center lines of all the streets. You turned all the angles and measured the distances. So in the offices, they could draw that on a map to scale. Then we would do what did they call that? You drew all the houses, not details, but the outline of the house, driveways, garages, and you sidewalks, curbs, pavement, and you drew it on a sheet, and they plotted that on maps in the LA office. And that way, then you took what they call cross sections, and that's taking elevation. So when it goes in the office, the guys that are designing the new highway, they have the location and the elevation and a description of everything that's there. So I did that for a while. Eventually we got started with new highways that were designed, and we were starting to do construction. But I'd already moved up a ways, and in a reasonably small amount of time, I was a party chief running the survey crew. I absolutely loved the work. It was outside, and it was just great. Eventually, I moved to Ventura from LA, and I got promoted to a supervisor job. My last few years with the state, I had Ventura County and part of LA County, and it was a job, but I wasn't doing anything but moving guys around. And I retired at a reasonably early age. I retired, I think, at 59, when I was 59 years old. But I've owned 4 businesses, and when I was tired of being in business after I retired, I went over to, I come from a family filled with alcoholics. It was in my family when I was growing up. My first wife was alcoholic, and 2 of my 4 sons were alcoholic. So I went over to Ventura College. They had a alcoholic program, and I got a degree in that. And I worked somewhere between 6 and 8 years with Ventura County as a drug counselor. I liked it. And eventually I decided just to quit working.
Wow. Well, that's quite a life there, bud.
I have led a very long and a very good, interesting life.
Very interesting life.
And right now, as old as I am, I have, look at Chris. She and I have been friends for what, 10 years or more. I have good friends like her.
Of course you do.
But the problem, and of course that's important to me because I have a son in Sacramento. I have a son in Oxnard who has health problems, and so I don't get a lot. And I have a family in Texas, and I have a family in Georgia. I have a large family in Georgia. But they're not, my grandkids, I don't see them because they're way, that's a long ways away.
Yeah,
No. I have no complaints about life. Life's been really good to me. I got, one of my breaks was my sister's husband got prostate cancer. And I was talking to him when he was lying in bed in the hospital, and he knew he had about 2 weeks to live. The doctors had told him. And he told me the reason I'm dying is because when I first knew something was wrong, I didn't go to a doctor. I waited too long. So he scared me. So I came home, got a phone book app. We had phone books back then. And I found a doctor, and I went to see him. And I went to him, and about 4 or 5 years after I started going to him on an annual basis, he told me, you have cancer. So he gave me a number of the name of a book. He said, get this book and read it, and then come back and tell me what you want me to do. And the book had several different ways to treat prostate cancer, but it was obvious that the only real way, if you wanted to get rid of it, was surgery, pretty radical surgery. So I went back and told him that, and it was taken out. He told me that my prostate was round, and it had a lining on outside, and the cancer was right up against the lining. Probably even in weeks, it would have broken through, and then you're dead. So I've been really fortunate my whole life. I have no complaints about anything. If I kicked the proverbial bucket tonight, I still wouldn't be complaining.
well, it sounds like you knew how to work the system, or you found a way.
Well, I think I've been very fortunate.
Yeah, so one more question. I'm always interested to know how you feel the military changed you as a person.
Well, I don't think you would want to use me as an example. I have no idea why I'm
for examples. I'm not looking for examples.
No, but well, nobody in my family is like me. I am a very, very strong individual. I don't want to conform. I want to be me, who I am. And the military was really, really difficult. One of the things that, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but we fought at Bastogne. We come back to France, and I get looked on the board, and I'm on an officer's mess, which means I'm going to be serving an officer I was fighting with a few weeks before. Now I'm going to serve him his dinner. That kind of stuff just really bothered me. And so when I walked out of Fort MacArthur in San Pedro with my discharge, I kept thinking, somebody's going to yell at me. I can't believe I'm getting out of here. So I don't think you ever want to use me as an example. The Army, for a lot of people spend a career there, and they like it. And I'm not knocking that. It's just that I, as an individual, am not set up to be under strict supervision.